If you've been watching my videos lately, then you're probably aware that I regularly use the Metabones 0.71 times Speed Booster Ultra to convert my EF lenses to the Micro Four Thirds mount found on my Pocket 4K. In fact, that's what I'm using to film this right now. Well, there's been some updates to that category, with Metabones releasing a Speed Booster specifically designed for the Pocket 4K, and Viltrox releasing a Mark II to their popular focal reducer as well. So today we're going to compare these two new units against my previous model, and I'll even show you how to adjust the back focus on each of them to help make your lenses more parfocal. Let's get undone. Gerald Undone. He's crazy. What's happening, everybody? I'm Gerald Undone, and roads, where we're going, we don't need roads. So many of you have been asking me about the new Metabones and what advantages it brings when using it on your Pocket 4K, which it's specifically designed for, and a lot of that comes down to sensor stack thickness. In front of your camera sensor are several layers of glass, and this comprises the sensor stack, and it can vary in thickness depending on the model. So some of those Micro Four Thirds cameras, for which the current Micro Four Thirds to EF Speed Booster was designed, is for about 4mm thick sensor stack, but the one on the Pocket 4K is only 2.4mm thick, and so the current gen of Speed Boosters isn't really optimized for that sensor design. In fact, if we compare the new Metabones here in my hand to, well, I've got the Viltrox here, the other one's obviously on the camera, but we can see, you see how raised this area is on the Viltrox, which is for just regular Micro Four Thirds, and how much more protruding the one is on the new Metabones? This adds some restrictions, meaning that you can't actually use this one on the other Micro Four Thirds cameras, but you can use this design on both. The only issue is that in some cases, this design may not give you the sharpest image possible on a camera like the Pocket 4K. But this design can only be used on the Pocket 4K. Now, the practical implications of this change are going to vary a lot depending on what lens that you pair it with. If you're using a lens that is more telecentric or has the exit pupil further away from the sensor, you're not going to see as much of a difference. And this kind of makes sense because the rays are, more straight and more close together, and I'll probably just be able to penetrate the sensor stack without seeing much, complications. But if your rays are coming in wider, which means that will also apply if you use a wider maximum aperture, then there might be some issues there where the thicker sensor stack are going to monkey up the rays a little bit trying to get in on the sides. So basically, if you're using a longer lens with a narrower aperture, you're probably not going to see any differences. And if you're using a wider focal length with a wider maximum aperture, like 20 or 24mm, let's say like f1.4, then you might notice some differences in sharpness, and this new design will have some benefits. And I already found this to be true with some tests that I did earlier using the Canon 100mm macro f2.8, which obviously has a much smaller aperture than 1.4, and the 100mm focal length made it so that there wasn't really apparent any differences between the two speed boosters. But today we're going to be testing a lens more in the middle. We'll use the Sigma 18-35 f1.8, which again is a lens that I highly recommend in this sort of pairing configuration anyway, and we're going to see if that has any differences between the new Metabones and the old one, as well as we'll throw the Viltrox into the mix there to see if this speed booster, which is only about less than a quarter of the price of the Metabones, can keep up. So let's go do that now. Okay, so for the first test here, we're just going to shoot some charts so we have a bit of a control baseline. But while I'm at that, I want to explain a little bit about that parfocal thing that I was discussing, because this speed booster and lens combination is already set up, because this is the one that I've been using all along. So this one is perfectly parfocal. And in a previous video when I mentioned that, some of you were saying, I thought parfocal only applied when you zoomed in and then focused, but not when you zoomed out. I've been able to dial these in, so it doesn't really matter whether you focus on the wide end or on the telephoto lens, it stays sharp all the way through. So if you come around here, I'll show you using the focus peaking on the Blackmagic here. So if we focus the lens right here while we're in like the middle of the zoom range, and then we can zoom all the way out, and you see how everything is green, that means it's in focus. I have the focus peaking to be set to green. And if we zoom all the way in, you see how it remains in focus. And so some people, say that you can only do that when you are doing a zoomed in, and then when you zoom out, if it remains in focus. But I find that it's harder to do when you zoom out, but you can still do it so that even when you zoom out, then when you zoom in, it should still be able to stay in focus. And this means that your lens is pretty much parfocal all the way through the zoom range. Okay, so now all I'm going to do is just make sure the focus is good and then record a couple clips of this scene with each one of the focal reducers. Okay, so now I'm going to switch to one of the other speed boosters, and I'll give you a few notes about the build quality as we do this. So this one is the classic EF to Micro Four Thirds one, and I think it's really, really good. I like the fit on the lens. I think it's nice and snug, but not too much, and the fit on the body is good as well. I noticed that with the Viltrox one, which we'll put that one on next, that the fit on the lens is really, really, really snug. as far as the build quality, you know, they feel about the same. Like the Viltrox one might be a little bit lighter and maybe have, well, it feels like metal construction all the way through. The parts might be a little bit less refined looking, but I mean, it's definitely, it looks better than 4 times less money. All right, so, but when you put it on the lens, it's quite solid to get it on there, which I would say is maybe a little bit too tight. But then when you put it on the body, which we'll do now, it is quite a bit looser once it's on there. It's sometimes even a little bit harder to get on because it's kind of wobbles a little bit. And so can you see this play here? So that might be the only real build quality difference that I was able to detect, is the looseness of it on the mount to the camera. It has the same functions, like there's a function button on the side, just like with the Metabones one. And like I said, it feels metal and looks pretty good, but it is definitely looser on the mount. Okay, let's see if there is a reduction in quality switching to the Viltrox one. One thing I did notice when I switched to the Viltrox is you see the F number here under the iris category, it's 1.2, but when I had the other Metabones Speed Booster on, it was 1.3, and you can move it to 1.3, but it's interesting how the maximum aperture conversion changed when using the Viltrox over the Metabones. The lens is a 1.8, but the adapter is supposed to display its 0.71 times conversion on it, and the Viltrox seems to round down where the Metabones seems to round up. Okay, so now we're going to switch to the new Metabones one that was designed specifically for the Pocket 4K. And you can see again, this Viltrox is really freaking hard to get off. Okay, so for the Pocket 4K one, it has this little foot on here. All of them have that. I just took them off for the Viltrox and the original Metabones because I was doing some autofocus tests on the GH5, and they were hard to get on and off because of the cage that I have on the GH5. But rest assured, they all come with the same base support here that you can use, you know, to attach to your cage and that kind of thing. As far as the new Metabones one, it feels like the old one. I would say pretty similar build quality, construction, look, and everything. The main difference here is this section that protrudes. And you notice this goes much deeper now into the body than the previous one did, and this is going to help with preventing that funny angle stuff that I was talking about with the thinner sensor stack. Okay, so let's mount this one on. Now, you do need to be a little bit more careful when handling that optic. Try not to jam it against the body if you're going in wrong. And again, don't put that speed booster on a Micro Four Thirds body that is not the Pocket 4K. Now that we're back on a Metabones version, in this case the specified 4K one, the iris is showing f1.3 again. So it's only the Viltrox that has it at f1.2. So I'm just going to focus now and then do the little test clip for the specified 4K Metabones, and then we'll compare the sharpness on the computer. Okay, so now we moved outside, and I'm going to do pretty much the same test again, but this time we have a branch in front of the sky, so we can kind of see a little bit about aberration, detail throughout the frame. If there's any weirdness going on, we should be able to capture it here. So I'm just going to focus on the branch now. Okay, so now we're going to do a little bit of autofocus tests between the Viltrox and the old Micro Four Thirds. This has nothing to do with the new Pocket 4K one. I just know that some of you wanted to know if the new Mark II Viltrox, how it compared with the Metabones, the classic Micro Four Thirds one. Now I will let you know that I rolled back the firmware on the Metabones one, which you're about to see the results in a minute. There's a new one for version 3.4 that came out at the end of August, and I found that as soon as I put that firmware update on, the autofocus just went in the toilet. Where with the older version, I found it more comparable with the latest firmware version that's on the Viltrox right now. All right, so we're gonna set this to AFC, and then we're gonna put this to face detection, and it should work. Let's check. Okay, so we're back in the studio here, and I'm just going to do a couple more autofocus tests just to make sure that we cover all the bases. I'm going to switch over to the different autofocus. Instead of using the face detection, I'm going to jump over to the one area, that box, and I've got it about smallish size and put it in the center there. And we're just going to move point to point. I've got the Viltrox on first, and then I'll switch over to the Metabones. And this will also give you an opportunity to hear how much noise it's making. I don't know if you can hear it over me right now, but it's already trying to focus in the background. So we'll see if it's any good at just kind of like doing some focus moves throughout the scene. Here we go. So it seems to be focusing in the sense that it is sort of jumping to the object and then it does get sharp, but there's like an in and out and it's rapid. It's like slunk, 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 and then it finally gets in focus. You can use it for single shot. You put it in, AFS, or even a manual would be better because then it's not going to hunt. So put it in manual, press AF on, it'll cheap focus, and then lock off your shot and you're good to go from there. Or for photos, if you're just doing like a portrait or something, get the focus, then take the shot. But anything that's moving or anything that you want to track, it's not going to look good. It's going to be really jarring. Okay, so I want to show you one last thing before I put the Pocket 4K back together so that I can film the A-roll and conclusion to this video. And that has to do with adjusting that infinity focus or back focus on these focal reducers so that you can make your lenses more parfocal. Now, if you're using something like the 18 to 35, which your copy may be different than mine because I heard that there is some variance in this regard, my copy wasn't very parfocal at all. So at 18 to 35, it wouldn't maintain focus when I zoom through. But I've been able to adjust all of these to achieve, I would say, pretty darn good parfocalness on the 18 to 35. And I'll show you how I did that. So the first thing I would suggest that you do is you place some marks on here so you can always reset it. I don't know if you can see this very well, but you see this little black magic marker here that's lined up with this one? This one that I've put here, so this is my baseline, and then I've moved it. So there was another one in here before on this side. Let's see if you can see this one right here. That's where it was originally. That mark was over here, but I've turned it so that it moved over to this side, and then I put a new mark in. So this is my 18 to 35 parfocal mark, and this is my default mark. And I did that with just black magic marker like this, and you can just draw on it. And then if you ever want to change that or take it off, the magic marker is easy to get off. Just use a cotton swab, and this is a Q-tip, dip it in a little bit of rubbing alcohol, and then you can just erase either the mark in there or out here quite easily. And then once you have that, if you want to give yourself a safety mark, you need a tiny little flathead screwdriver. You can see this one here is just a thin little flathead. And along the edge of the Metabones, if we turn it till we see it, you'll see this little recess in here. And hopefully the light can catch that a little bit. But right in there is a little hole that you put the screwdriver in. And that's also what this line is for, I guess, to let me know. I guess I should have figured that out. But you can just unscrew that screw like this. And it doesn't actually come out. It just comes like to the front of the hole and then is loose, and then you're actually able to turn this element here. Now again, I'm going to make sure that I can line up my black mark to that, but as you can see, we can just turn this now and it makes an adjustment, and now we can see that black mark that originally I had lined up with the other one is now over here. And generally you want to turn it, probably you can see the distance. The one mark was here and the other mark was here. That distance, maybe about, I don't know, 3 hours on the 12 o'clock scale, is the one that made it parfocal for me. But I'm going to go ahead and put this back, and then you just go in and you tighten this up. Now, the actual way to find your mark is going to require trial and error. So you're going to have to move it a little bit and then put your lens on it, put it on your body, and then check and see how parfocal it is. And if it's getting better, then keep going that direction. If it's getting worse, then go back the way you came from. And the way that I like to do this is, like we talked about earlier, you can zoom all the way in, get a really accurate focus, maybe zoom in on your monitor, make sure everything's precise, and then zoom out and see how sharp it is. And then when you zoom out, you can figure out by then adjusting focus if you need to adjust focus forward or backward, and then make that adjustment on there. And you're just going to have to keep doing it. You might have to probably mount and unmount it like 5 or 10 times in order to get it perfectly if that's what you want to go for. And then once you do, like I said, you can have it where you can focus on the wide end even and then pull into the telephoto end and it'll still remain at focus. Now I'll show you how to do it on the Viltrox adapter, which is pretty much exactly the same except for one less step, which is that you don't really actually need a screwdriver here. But the easiest way I found to do the Viltrox one was to actually adjust it from this one because it sticks out more. So you can just adjust it from the inside. Okay, so I've got the clips loaded up here in Resolve, and I'm just going to look through the first ones to see if there's any image quality differences, and then we'll check the autofocus a little bit more zoomed in to see what we can observe about that. All right, so if we zoom in on this first one here, which is the regular Micro Four Thirds Metabones, and we just take a look at the sharpness in the center of the frame, and then let's switch over to the one that's optimized for the Pocket 4K. Looks pretty much identical, and then we'll switch over to the Viltrox. Okay, there is a slight reduction in sharpness there in the center with the Viltrox, as you can see. Let's jump over to the side here so we can see if there's anything weird going on. This is the Viltrox one here. This is the optimized Metabones, and this is the regular Metabones. I would say the results are the same. The two Metabones are pretty much identical, and the Viltrox is maybe just a hair less sharp, but pretty insignificant overall. But this is where you can also see the difference in the field of view. So if you look at the Viltrox here, and then we look at the Metabones, you can see that it actually crops in a bit, and same with the other Metabones. They're pretty much identical. But then if we go to the Viltrox, you get a little bit wider of a field of view. And this seems to be congruent with that iris thing we were talking about earlier, where it was actually f1.2. So maybe the reduction on the Viltrox isn't quite as it's written. It may not be a 0.71 times. It might actually be like a 0.695 or 0.703 type reduction. And so we're getting just a slightly wider frame and just a slightly larger aperture, enough to trick the camera into thinking that it's a 1.2 instead of a 1.3. But these differences are pretty insignificant, and they don't really seem to make much of an impact on exposure, because as I flip back and forth here, I can't really see a difference at all. It seems like the Viltrox is maybe 5% less sharp than the other ones, but I really don't think this is going to be an issue considering how sharp all the lenses are and the resolution that you're getting out of these cameras. I wouldn't really sweat it. So now let's jump over to the autofocus tests. I was surprised. The Metabones actually performed quite well here. When I was doing a quick little preview of it before I saw the finished result, I didn't think that it was going to do this well, because it did seem like it was hunting a lot, but it actually seems quite good. Now keep in mind, like I said, this is the previous edition of the firmware. When I updated the firmware on the Metabones, it got worse. And so now let's take a look at the Viltrox. And the Viltrox did seem like it was struggling, and it's doing that sort of quick throwing the glass in and out thing. Now when it gets it fine, but it does create these kind of less than, you see that weird like pulsing. You don't really want that extreme slamming of the glass. It's not going to be pleasant at all in any kind of video focus transition. But yeah, it's not terrible. Like for some sort of, shoddy vlog, I think it would work fine. But if you want a perfect transition, you cannot rely on using these adapters. All right, so in conclusion, let's talk a little bit about value. I was pleasantly surprised with this new Mark II of the Viltrox. I saw some of the videos on the first original edition of the Viltrox, and it seemed like there was more of an argument there to recommend spending, 4 times more on the Metabones, because the Viltrox just wasn't quite there. There was definitely a noticeable reduction in sharpness, and there was other performance issues. But I would say with the Mark II, the gap has closed significantly, and it's closed enough to really start to question if the price premium on the Metabones is worth it, because yeah, it's like 4.3 times more US. This one's like 150, this one's 650, and both the Metabones are the same price, whether you get the Micro Four Thirds one or the optimized one. And I've also noticed that with the lenses that I tested it on, again, the 100mm macro for Canon and the Sigma 18-35, I didn't really notice a huge difference between the new optimized Pocket 4K one and the original one. So my advice is that if you're trying to buy a Metabones and you don't own one, and you plan on only using it on the Pocket 4K, then sure, get the one that's optimized for it. If you have multiple Micro Four Thirds cameras and you want to swap it around, I don't really think you're going to lose anything by getting the old Micro Four Thirds one. And if you already own the regular Micro Four Thirds one for your Pocket 4K, I would not say that the new optimized one is worth selling this one and buying that one, or getting the other one. I think you're going to get pretty similar results, and I would just stick with your regular Micro Four Thirds one. But if you don't own any and you're considering the Viltrox, or maybe you need a second one and you're wondering if the Viltrox is good enough, I would say that the Mark II, this new one from Viltrox, is pretty capable. And I would say that it's definitely a great value if we're going to consider the Metabones the sort of price point. Then this one's coming in at a steal at, like I said, probably only about 5 or 10% worse for 4.3 times cheaper. So that is a great value proposition. But that's going to be it for me. I hope you found this video entertaining, or at least helpful, and if you did, make sure you leave it the old thumbs up and consider subscribing if you haven't already. But if you did not find this video helpful or entertaining, then go f*** yourself, San Diego. Alright, I'm done.